Joseph was born in 2005. I had a very normal pregnancy. There were some issues around his birth, but nobody quite knows what that was. We were in NICU for a little while, but he went on and was sort of a fairly normal baby. It was at his 8-month checkup that the health visitor said, I don't think he's developing quite as we'd expect. And so we ended up signed in underneath the CDC. And then in the January of 2022, he one morning woke up and said, I've got pain. And that was the point that this lump that we had thought in his tummy that was quite possibly constipation. We went to the doctors and we set out along a long and, well, not long actually, by the end of the month it was all done and dusted, but it seemed long at the time, you know, sort of tests and scans and ultrasounds and bits and pieces. And then on about the 23rd of January we were told that Joseph had a massive adrenocortical, let's get that wrong, tumour in his abdomen, and it was about the size of his liver. Well, Joseph was still 16 at that point, so 2022, so we were quite firmly under paediatrics in our hospital, and we were told that he had this tumour, and then everything moved quite quickly. We had to go to a different hospital with a sort of more childhood cancer speciality. They couldn't remove the tumour, the long and short of it. His physiology, as I said, nothing straightforward about him ever, but also just the size of it and the it was just very much part of him. So yes, there was no removal. Just before the appointment, however, I had noticed a difference in the way that Joseph's tummy was looking and feeling, even to my eye. So as we arrived into the appointment, or just before, I'd rung and spoken to the paediatric oncologist and said, can you put hands on Joseph, please, just before we talk to him about these tablets. And as Joseph laid on the examining bed in there and he put hands on, he just looked at me and was like, so that was the point that we knew the tablets weren't going to work. As it turned out, Joe, the palliative doctor, was in that meeting. So she literally just happened to be in the right meeting at the right time, because all of a sudden this meeting went from the palliative care of potential chemotherapy to palliative care of, oh, there's nothing that can be done now, so let's see what happens moving forward. And so she was placed there literally to be able to say, so moving forward, what have you considered? Have you put any thought into this? These are the types of questions we need to be asking. So relatively quickly we had a team set up. Well, the palliative team was introduced to us, but you know, they started to visit us at home, and that was where Joseph's care sort of took place. I'd already been his full-time sort of parent carer anyway, so this just stepped up a little bit. At some point we had to stay in hospital, where I was taught how to use all the feeding tube, and the machinery was, you know, delivered to home and moved that forward. I was administering all his medication. We were lucky enough that we had the feeding tube in that respect, because he didn't take any medication orally. That was never going to be an easy option, but I had all of that set up in place. I think it was decided by the palliative team, the way that they'd worded it to me was that they were going to give me their full support to support Joseph at home. And that felt really important to me. I felt valued, I think. It's very easy to feel marginalised when you're in situations like this, where it's sort of all encompassing. And I didn't. I felt, I mean, important. I don't mean to make that sound big, but I was the most important thing in Joseph's life, and I was never made to feel any less than that. So we had hospital visits where necessary. Other than that, the doctors and nurses came to visit us, the nurses more frequently, the doctor once a week. And then when Joseph's medication needed to be upped, we talked about morphine first of all. So he was given morphine patches, and then breakthrough, just if the pain got too much for him. So I was given training in all of that and told how to log it, and you know, to make sure that everything was just exactly as it needed to be. And then there was a move on to fentanyl patches when the morphine was no longer sufficient. And actually during that whole conversation about medication, Joseph, being the anomaly that he always was, he was very definitely a child. A child who freaked the nurses out because he had hairy legs and they'd never really had to deal with that before. Joseph was able to stay at home with the exception of the odd scan, and I mean even blood tests were being taken from home. The community team would come out and take the blood tests from him. You know, at one point where we had to have urine tests and all sorts of bits and pieces, and I don't know, peeing into jugs with chemicals in the bottom and all sorts, you know. I mean, I literally had a nurse on my doorstep at 6:30 in the morning because that's the time that it needed to be done, and I couldn't have asked for anything more, I don't think. I was incredibly lucky with this whole experience. I mean, not only did we have a fantastic team around us with the NHS, people who were talking to each other and you know, sort of really just being very sensible about their approach to everything. But I had a child who was fearless about death. We had, you know, numbers of conversations, and actually he started many of the conversations just by watching something off television, or, you know, and what about me, mummy? And it's like, what about you, what? And I'm like, what about when I die? And I'm like, oh, okay, we're having that conversation, are we then now? But we'd had not a great year actually in 2022. We lost a dog at the end of August, and so that was just before Joseph was actually, you know, told that there is nothing that we can do. But we were able to start having a conversation about death and about what that meant, and about the fact that, you know, Rufus has gone, his energy's somewhere, his energy's up there, and he's you know, waiting. And Auntie Pat, my Auntie Pat, so in effect, I mean, she was kind of a grandma figure to Joseph, and they were very close. But Auntie Pat also had cancer at that time, and she was getting more poorly, very soon to be going to her hospital hotel, so her hospice, where she would die. But we were then able to say, you know, well, Rufus is up there and he's waiting for Auntie Pat to go and join him. And then we had, at the point where Joseph was getting more poorly, so he was still up and down the stairs, he was still sleeping, he was an absolute marvel, I can't tell you, but he was still sleeping in his bed. But I got to a point one day where I was like, I just need a bath, I just have to go and have a bath. And there was, at that point, there was, I didn't have the respite in place. So I said to Joseph, you're going to have to come upstairs with me, kiddo, because I couldn't leave him downstairs comfortably. So I popped him into my bed, the bedroom next to the bath, and I went and had a bath. And when I came on in, he looked up at me from the bed and he was just like, oh, mummy, I'm so tired. And I was like, yes, I know you are, Poppet. I said, well, what can we do about that? Expecting him to sort of say, can I sleep in your bed? And would that be, and I was, you know, and then he literally went, I think I will go and see Auntie Pat and Joseph and Rufus soon. And I was like, yeah. So, you know, I was so lucky. I can't think of another way of describing it, that he approached death with certainty, without fear, and with an openness that I think most adults would be really jealous of. But when it came to him being in those last days, he was really content at home. He was really happy that if he didn't want to have his teeth cleaned, he didn't have to have his teeth cleaned. He could eat what he liked. He could, you know, he basically was lauding it. He was little Lord Fauntleroy, and he was really happy. But that would not have been the case if he was in hospital. He would have been really miserable and really upset, and I would have been very stressed. So we got to enjoy Joseph's death, and I will be always grateful for that. Joseph actually died on his birthday at the end of January last year, and really honestly, everybody was marvelling about the fact that he was still getting up and going to the toilet and coming back and going, I will have 3 sausages and some Smarties and some whatever. He was still eating quite happily. What he wanted, admittedly, wasn't anything enough to sustain anything, but you know, he literally got to the end of time, and we had the palliative care doctor turning up and going, he's doing what? He's still eating. So yeah, he, you know, but just being able to trip to the fridge, and in the last week of his life, he was still pretty much, I mean, he'd slowed down hugely, obviously. His processing time was different. There wasn't as much joy in him. He was just exhausted. But he was still there up until probably the Wednesday morning. That was the last time he got up and actually used the toilet himself. And at that point we were waiting for him to die. He wasn't happy anymore. We didn't want him to be, yeah, as he was. So it was, we'd had the palliative care nurses out on the evening of the Friday. He just had a bit of a moment, I think, where he was more aware. He'd come out of his medicine, and he really wasn't happy. So we'd called them out, and he had a syringe driver by that point. And so they'd come out and administered some extra morphine for him, and the one of the girls had gone and the other one had stayed on for a little bit longer, and she left about 12:10, and Joseph died 29 minutes later. But yeah, so I'm not even sure she'd got home by the time I'd rung her. She had to turn around and come back again, but yeah, he went really peacefully in his own space.
On his birthday.
On his birthday, yeah. So he was, he went literally, he was sort of 39 minutes 18, but yeah. The time, spending time with somebody, it seems like it's too much to begin with, particularly for a child like Joseph, who's quite complicated. And I'm not saying that this is just for special needs children. I think it's for anybody, but spending that time at the beginning and getting to know and understand a situation was really important for me as a parent. So any carer, I think, was really important for Joseph as a patient. So again, any patient, but ultimately it saves time. And I found that the people who actually went, no, this is important, and listened at that moment, the future conversations and the future appointments that happened were so much more efficient because of that inefficient first appointment. I think from a SEN point of view, we learnt different hospitals, different approaches to special educational needs. I think, as far as I can see, everybody has a SEN point of view sort of embedded. We've been asked to fill out passports and paperwork and all sorts of things that vary from 2 pages, which give absolutely no information, to giving 17 pages, which is far too much information for one person to sort of think in amongst all of that, what's happening, you know, where am I? But what nurse or doctor is going to have the time to read all of that also? You know, I think it's really important to find the important questions, ask those and get those important answers. And again, I think it's just that time thing, that the paediatric nurses were, the time that they gave, that was the time that Joseph needed. We did have a couple of occasions where you know, people came in and were like, we're just doing this, and they'd come in and manhandle Joseph in a way that you would a child. I'm not talking about anything sort of, but you know, just sort of real hands-on and getting and done it. But the after effects to that, for my child who can't process what's happening, and you know, this nurse at the point going, well, he's just really badly behaved, and I'm like, well, he's not. We just needed to give him a little bit of time to actually figure out what was. And I think, you know, it's nice to see that it's coming in. It's hard to witness when it's not right, you know, when it's not there and it's not quite right yet. But no, as a general rule, I think everything was, we couldn't have asked for anything better, really. The teamwork, I think, more than anything, it was phenomenal to watch. The team that put their all into Joseph's care, and not just Joseph's. The palliative nurses and doctors are unbelievable. You know, they're I mean, outstanding. It's literally their job to watch somebody die. And they did it with love and care and attention at every point.
Thank you so much, Esther.
That's okay. That's